Welcome to the Growth Plus Exit podcast, where owners of privately held middle market companies talk about founding, scaling, and exiting their businesses successfully. Learn how to maximize and monetize your business on your own terms. Let's get started.
Hello, I'm Heather Bennett, your host for the Growth Plus Exit podcast, featuring middle market business owners and experts talking about founding, growing, scaling, and exiting their businesses on their own terms. Past guests have included John Fairclough, founder of Resicom Group, Matt Vukov, co-founder and CEO of TalentCraft, and Kathleen Purley, co-founder and CEO of Adair. To learn more about these, listen to their episodes of the Growth Plus Exit podcast, which is found on most podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple, Audible, and more. This episode is brought to you by Newport LLC, a team of seasoned executives helping CEOs of privately held companies grow, de-risk, and exit their businesses successfully. Newport LLC is a winner of the prestigious Inc. magazine Power Partner Award, a list of elite B2B companies from across the globe. To see the entire list, visit inc.com/Power Partner Awards. To learn more about Newport, visit us at newportllc.com, or of course, find us on LinkedIn. Before introducing today's guest, I would like to thank Philip D'Souza, who's a former guest on the show, for introducing us. You can find Philip on LinkedIn, and he has a podcast as well, so check it out. Today's guest is David Reid. David Reid is a highly experienced CEO, board advisor, and transformational leader with deep experience guiding middle market companies through growth, operational restructuring, and strategic exits. David was the founder and CEO of the successfully sold Epic Information Solutions. Today, as the founder of Plan B Gurus, he partners with owners and executive teams to accelerate value creation through disciplined execution, leadership alignment, and scalable operation systems. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Heather. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So we'll get right into it. Tell me how Epic Information Systems got started.
Yeah, so Epic was originally a different company called Complete Integrations, but I had some expertise in a development language at the time, back in the 90s, early 90s. And a company approached me from a different city that wanted to expand into my city. And they thought that I could be a good partner for them. And so we ventured off into a relationship where we spun up an office in my city, and I was 50% owner and they were 50% owner. Fast tracked 5 years, and I'm buying them out of my operation. And we kind of started moving separate ways, but as I was more interested in newer technologies and advancements, and we just continued on. And we had many evolutions through my company. My company started as a ERP and development company, moved into selling hardware, and then into services, professional services, but eventually into managed services, and then eventually exiting about 20 years later.
Okay, so that's a big leap, going from having a partner who, had experience in to yourself, even though you had spent 5 years with them. What were the first couple of years when you were on your own? Did anything surprise you about that time period?
What really surprised me was understanding the people that you're partnering with. And it seems so rosy at the beginning of those conversations, so much optimism and what you forget to think about is what happens when it goes wrong. What happens if it doesn't all translate into what you and the other people thought it was going to be? And that could be because of something you did or something they did, or just a difference of opinions. But having an understanding of that going in and really asking yourself what could go wrong was the big miss. And I learned that later. As I learned that, as I got into future partnerships, I was able to construct shareholder agreements that allowed me to deal with those situations in a much easier and quicker method than when they come about and you don't have good structures to dealing with the problems. and finding ways to transcend that situation you're in.
So, and you had to buy them out, right? So
That's right.
what did the capital raise look like? Like where did the funding come from at that stage?
Yeah. So great lesson learned there, because I funded it through our the money we had in the company. And this would have been in 1999. So if you're thinking about what was happening at that time, Y2K was happening at that time. And it was, we were booming because of Y2K. We're selling new software. We're doing all this work around Y2K, upgrading hardware and so on and so forth. So we were making lots of money. And so when I went to do a deal with them, and they were quite happy to do a deal, I paid them out of our cash reserves, out of the bank, what we had money for. But that depleted my funds pretty quickly, not really thinking about what might go wrong. And what might go wrong was some overinvestment in a few things. The market really changed after Y2K. Essentially, everyone that needed to buy something had bought it before year 2000, not after year 2000. And so the market took a little bit of a slump, and my retained earnings took a beating. And and all of a sudden, the banks don't want to talk to you. You're into money crunches. It's more stressful. And so that was a big lesson for me to understand when borrowing money and the banks need to play a part. And so I took that forward, and never did I again have that problem. I never again had negative retained earnings, right, in the company. and that was because I learned that lesson the hard way.
There's so many ways. Exactly. And there's so many ways to fund business and to get capital. And it never ceases to amaze me. I feel like I learn new ways to fund businesses every day. And, from your experience, it sounds like you've learned a few different ways to do that.
But back in the 90s, it was tougher because, the first tier lenders, if you didn't have an asset, something for collateral, it was going to be your house, or you're going to do it personally. And when you're early in your business years, you don't necessarily own your house. You don't have those fixed assets. And so it becomes really hard for them to fund you. And then, which means you have to go to more expensive money. And then you start thinking, well, if I could just do this some other way, I'll just do it some other way. Right. So it's a challenging thing to work your way through, for sure.
Exactly. So, you talked about some of the obstacles that hit you right after Y2K. What happened next in terms of like, how did you grow the company? Who, did you bring on? It sounds like you went through a few iterations and pivots in terms of what the main focus of the company was on. So at this stage, I know we had talked a little bit earlier about you were thinking about growing towards exit. At which point after Y2K did you realize I need to start growing this business to sell it?
I was 10 years into the business when I had that epiphany. But prior to that, just before I had bought the business bought my partners out, I had started into a peer group, and that peer group was Vistage in the States, it's called. And being a pretty young and full of piss and vinegar kind of business owner, right? Like, you just don't know better. That peer group, I learned so much in the first 2 years through that peer group. And one of the stories that there's a couple stories, but one story that really sticks with me is we were sitting around starting this meeting, and we had a speaker in, and the speaker starts off his meeting asking us, "So what's your number?" And you go, "What do you mean, what's your number?" "Well, how much do you need to sell your business for so you never have to work again?" Oh, good question. I didn't have an answer for that. Nobody in the room had an answer for that, even though many of them had been in business for years or decades even. They did not know the answer to that question. And that really kind of stuck with me. I didn't do anything about it other than do some math and calculations to come up with a number. But I didn't take that to the next level for a number of years. But it was a really mind opening question and then through the next number of years got more and more educated around M&A work and talking about exiting, more about talking about selling your business more than exiting your business. Which I think was, again, in my naivety, I didn't really quite understand that selling isn't exiting, but to exit you must sell, and that those are two separate things, but tightly held together. And the selling needs to be what achieves you to have an optimal exit from your business. And that wasn't obvious back then, and no one was really talking about that. And so when I fast forward those into 10 years into my business, I'm sitting at the cabin, on the dock, looking at the water, and, it's like, what am I doing all this for? Right? Like, why am I working so hard? It's like making all the sacrifices I make, family sacrifices, health sacrifices, personal sacrifices. I'm going to exit my business eventually, right? Because we all have to. We all do. You have no choice. You're going to exit one way or another, right? But wouldn't it be nice to exit on your terms, exit when the timing is right, exit for a reason? And so that started my process to preparing for exit and thinking about, what does it mean to exit my business? What's life going to look like after I exit my business? So I understand what I'm preparing for. And so that was the start of my exit journey, sitting on the dock that one day and thinking about, why do I need to exit?
You covered so much there. It's such a, no, I mean, and especially like knowing the different stages of the awareness of, oh, I need to exit someday. And then the planning and what does it look like, and running the numbers and starting to understand. And then one of the areas I find consistently is overlooked is, what are you going to do afterward? What type of planning, and not simply from a financial perspective, certainly from that, managing your finances after an exit, incredibly important, but also with your time and attention. And is there an earnout? And there's so many like different things you need to be thinking about. So you'd mentioned that you started learning more about M&A and selling companies. Where did you go to look, especially at that time? I feel there are a lot of options for learning that now, maybe, not as succinct and cleanly as possible. Certainly my firm is working on ways to help educate business owners on that. But where did you go to look for information on preparing to sell your business?
Yeah, certainly my peer groups that I was involved in, that was probably the key place, either through speakers coming in and that, but also through conversation, right, with peers. Sometimes my initial peer group was non-industry specific, so I'm sitting around the table with people that are in different industries, but still talking about, selling business. And I would have seen a number of them sell their business and go through that process. So I was able to experience that process without having to go through it myself, right? And then when I got into an industry peer group, it became a much larger topic. You have more mature businesses that the business owners are thinking about selling. And so it's a more common topic that comes up. And as well as people start knocking on your door and asking if you want to sell your business. And so you need to kind of get ahead of all of that. I think of it like when people are knocking your door, asking you if you want to sell your business, and you say, okay, sure, I could talk about that. They're out there fishing and you're the fish, and you've bitten on their hook when you take their call and you say, I'll take it to the next step with you. And they're controlling the process. And I believe that's a pretty big mistake, because you get caught in this process that isn't defined by you, it's defined by the buyer. Whereas if you're holding the rod and you're out there fishing for buyers, whether they know it or not, you have way more control. You know what you're looking for. You know what kind of fish you want. What kind of buyer do you want? You get to go and find those buyers and identify them and start that conversation with the right buyers. Whereas when buyers just show up, they may not be the right buyer. You don't know anything about them. They just come out of nowhere. And that could be a bit of I've seen it happen many times, and it can result in a lot of regret after selling your business.
Absolutely. And that's, certainly regretting after selling is never a good thing. Buyer's
No,
remorse
that's
or
not
sellers,
optimal.
there's seller's remorse for sure. So as you're preparing Epic, you've reached that awareness that you are like, I need to sell this business. So what were the steps you took then to evaluate and plan to get your business ready? Because it's one thing to like prepare to sell it and like go through that, like, who do I want to be my buyer? But what did you figure out you needed to do to get it to that point where you're like, okay, now it's ready to sell? And how did you know when you got to that point?
Yeah, so good question. And there's a question before that, which is, what do you actually need to exit your business? And that was the question I first answered. So I did figure out, how much money do I need to never have to work again? I did figure out what would be the right kind of timing for my exit. And at that time I said, I'm going to sell about 50. And then, because that gives me a big runway to do all the things I want to do after I no longer have to go to work every day. And so I had that, sell it by 50, and then I'll exit shortly thereafter, sell it for this much money, et cetera, right? So you kind of define that. And then you go, well, what's my business worth today? And then you understand how big that gap is. And so one of the most critical things for a business owner to understand is, how do you value your business? How is your business actually valued by buyers? And I think as well, anybody in this industry knows that one buyer might pay you $1 million, another buyer might pay you $2.5 million. Well, why is that? Those are the things you need to understand, right? To understand, how do buyers value your business? And if you really need to drive a high valuation, then which buyers are going to be those ones? And what do you have to do to make it valuable to them? And so once I kind of understood how to value my business, I was able to say, well, what's my gap, right? Today my business is worth this, and I need it to be worth that. Ooh, that's pretty big. And I have this much time to do it in if I want to exit or sell by 50. And so that was the first step to understanding how big was the goal and the challenge that I had ahead of me to achieve what I wanted. And asking myself really the tough question, can I do it? Can I do it? Right? Can I do it? Is this in me to do? Because it's easy to say, oh, Elon Musk could have done that, but I'm not Elon Musk. I'm just a regular guy, regular business owner. So I had to come to that realization of, did I have enough time? Did I have enough skill? Could I do this? And I felt, yeah, I can do this. It's very achievable to do. And then I set off on that mission of going from the 20 some odd people I had, getting to building a company to over 100 people, right? And getting where I had a valuation, I had a buyer in mind and a valuation I wanted to achieve. And I achieved that because I had a plan, because I had a goal. If I didn't have that, I would have just been wandering aimlessly, doing things that may not actually increase the value of the company.
So give me an example, a few of those, what I would call the hard decisions that you had to make because it was the right decision to grow the company versus maybe what felt comfortable or what made sense at the moment, but you knew you had to make that hard decision to get to that growth. Yeah.
So certainly one of the things I learned, being in technology, things move pretty fast. And so understanding when to jettison something that you've been doing, a service, a product, when to move on from it, even though it might be making you some money, but you have people tied up in it. You have your mind tied up into it, but there's an optimal time to let go of that stuff and move on to and really invest in the next stuff that you're working on. And so that was tough. People seem to hang on to stuff, those legacy products and services they're doing way, way, way too long. And if you really think about fast forwarding to a sale, you think a buyer really wants to buy that old thing that you're doing, or that thing that represents 1% of your revenue or 2% of your revenue, and you have one employee that specializes in it and three customers that use that? Or no, they're not paying anything for that. You're getting zero value for that. And so without kind of understanding that, a business owner can be very susceptible to overvaluating their company because they don't understand the things that are happening in their company that are actually not valuable to the buyer. So I think I answered the question.
Yeah, no, that's a key that there's two things in there. It's really like understanding that you as the business owner may not and probably not the best evaluator of what the value of your company is. You're not a valuation expert. And that's okay because there are people out there who do it, but also to recognize that it's not just a professional, evaluation, but also that there's buyers who value and what they value. And I love the fact that you brought up, and this is like you said, it's a very hard thing to do, is to understand that there's parts of your business you may need to let go. You may need to sell early, have someone else acquire, whatever, get them off of your plate so that what you're offering a potential buyer looks exactly like what they want and what they're excited to purchase. So really you covered some really important parts of the exit process and the sale process.
And I'll add one more big lesson there was not just biting on everything that comes to your door, like not every customer is good. Not every new service is good. And so taking the time to understand, if I start going down doing this new thing for this customer that they want me to do, is that scalable? Can I translate that into being highly profitable for me, and I can scale it and it becomes more valuable in my business? Too often we do things a one-off kind of thing, right? And if you really do the numbers, you didn't make any money doing it. You lost money, doing that new thing. And it was too much risk, and it just didn't have scale or didn't have any momentum to it. So being careful about the new things as well. Just as you want to get rid of things, you also want to be careful about what you bring on, what you take on, not taking too many new products and services on, being very strategic about it so that you're not extending yourself too far.
So before we talk more specifically about the exit and that process, tell me about your proudest moment while being the owner of Epic.
My proudest moment. I I think my proudest moments have happened after I exited, when I run into a former employee and they say some kind words and say how much they appreciated what I did for them, how much they enjoyed working for Epic, the culture that we had built, how I was able to help them develop and grow, and where they are and what they're doing now. Right. I just, those are proud moments for me, for sure. For sure.
That's awesome. And just beautiful. It's very good to hear. Okay, so we'll get into the exit. Exiting and selling your business is complicated and nerve-wracking and a full-time job, in case anyone has not heard that already. As the business owner, going through due diligence is a full-time job. So tell me about your experience during that due diligence process.
Oh, well, can I back up the story a little bit and tell you a little bit about the journey along the way? So as I mentioned, I had set out on that day or that week at the cabin. I decided on a 10-year plan. I had 10 years to sell the business, and I knew how much I needed to sell it for. And so the next question was, well, who am I going to sell it to for that? Because it's kind of like, you can sell your business for $5 million and be 200 people. So you're selling it like at a low valuation or you can sell it, or you could have 50 people and sell it for $5 million at a higher valuation. or better valuation because you're more profitable. You've built something that a strategic buyer wants to buy. So I had decided at the time that I wasn't going to sell to, I wasn't going to exit through family or management. They just were not going to be able to pay me enough money so that I never had to work again. And so I eventually came to the idea that I'm going to sell to a strategic buyer. And I started thinking about who those people might be. It would be a US company coming into Canada. Unlikely they're coming my way. I'm in a little city in Winnipeg in the middle of nowhere in Canada. They're not coming here first. And I eventually came to the realization that the best company to buy me was our local telco company, because they were $1 billion company and they were, so they would have the financial means to do it. But more importantly, we shared the same market. And I could see that what I did sat right next to them, and this could be a good opportunity somewhere down the line. But I had to be way bigger than I was today at that time, right? I was way too small. It was like they could care less about me, right? And so we set off on a mission. I said, okay, great. So now I know who I'm going to sell to, or I'm going to try to sell to them. I don't know if I will, but I have a target. I know how much I want to sell for, and so I know how big I need to be. And then I kind of realized too that, I don't get to decide when to sell. A buyer gets to decide when I sell. And so what causes that to happen? Well, some buyers are out there buying, and so they always have a compelling event to buy. But in this case, I knew there would have to be some type of opportunity arise. Some compelling event would have to arise, and I'd have to be ready and open to that opportunity when it arises, because I would not know when it was going to happen. So I set off on the mission of building the company to get into that valuation I needed, to over 100 people. And at the same time, I was working really hard to build my relationship with my identified buyer. And so they happened to be a supplier to us. They were our customer, and we actually competed against them for business as well, which is a very not normal kind of thing. But it was pretty cool because they really knew who we were over time. They got to know who we were, and we were a thorn in their side, but we did good services for them, and we were a customer. He had this crazy, but along the way, I was able to meet and grow my relationship with the CEO at the time. And so fast forward now, 8 years and 7-8 years into this 10-year journey I had planned for. IBM's closing their data center in town, and there's no place for these big customers to go. And I go, perfect. That's a great thing for us to do. We should build a data center. That's right in line with what we do. And then I'm like, but I don't really want to. If I do that, it's going to cost millions and millions and millions of dollars of capital, which would really extend me out, and it forced me to also be in the business for probably another 5 to 10 years. And that really wasn't on my plan. That wasn't my plan. But then it just dawned on me, oh, I bet the telco wants to do this too. I bet there's an opportunity there. So I took the opportunity to call the CEO and say, hey, can we get together and have a chat? And sure enough, he says, of course, because he knew who I was. Got together the following week. I said, Calvin, I got this great opportunity. I want to build a data center. IBM's closing theirs, but I need a partner. I can't do it by myself. And I think you guys would be a great partner. He goes, well, funny you say that. We also have been thinking about building a data center, and we're quite along the path on that. And I'm really struggling with how we're going to operationalize it and who's going to do that for me in our company here. And I like your idea, but we just don't partner very well. And so I responded with, well, maybe you should buy us, and then we can build that data center for you. That's not a bad idea, he says. I'll get my guy to call you. I went back to the office and told my business partner at the time, I sold the business today. Sure enough, 8 months later, we sold the business. And so that's just an example of, I was the one fishing. I wasn't the fish. And it really had a different effect on that whole sale process, because it allowed me to stay in control, because I knew who the buyer was and I knew them intimately. I knew what they would value, what they wouldn't value. I had built something that I thought was going to be more valuable to them than to somebody else. And so as we entered into due diligence, it was really important at the right points in that due diligence phase to be able to tell my buyer what are my non-negotiables. So one of the things I said pretty early on was just, I don't have to sell today. I have no reason to sell. The only reason I'll sell is because I'm getting a premium valuation on our company. So I put that anchor in there pretty early as we were going through due diligence and that really set the tone for when, the letter of intent came and eventually the offer letter. But it was all pretty on purpose, pretty planned in that sense. You didn't know exactly how it was going to fall out, but it was with purpose, with intention. If you specifically about due diligence, though, I would say one of the most important things in your business is to have all your ducks in order. You have great systems, great information, organized data, good financial statements, good history. The ability to produce a document during due diligence immediately or shortly thereafter being asked for it sets such a high impression with the buyer. A lot of buyers that do multiple, they can't believe how fast we were responding to their questions with good data, good reports, being squeaky clean, right? They couldn't find anything wrong in our business. But being able to respond and provide them the information they wanted faster than they could ask us and analyze it, put us in a very good negotiating position. So that would be my key piece of advice for people heading into due diligence. Well, before you even get there, get yourself organized. Look at due diligence lists. Make sure you can produce all of that information quickly, accurately, not making it up on the fly or trying to figure out how to get that data out of your system. Understand all that and have it not ready to go, but ready to produce. That's, I think, is super critical.
That is excellent advice. It's such an interesting process, and having that completely ready data, set of data and file, not only makes you look better, but also makes your life as the business owner a lot more pleasant during that process and less nerve-wracking. I love that, I talk about this concept with a lot of the business owners I work with called hustle and luck. And the idea is exactly what you said, is you're hustling, you're preparing, you're strategically thinking long in advance, because there's going to be that moment sometime in the future where something's going to switch, something's going to happen, like the IBM data center opportunity. And then you have to go for it. But if you haven't been preparing that entire time, the luck doesn't hit and you don't get that big win. So I love how you break down how you approached that entire process. So, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but what about you in terms of selling the company? Did you have an earnout? Did you have to work afterward? Was there anything you had to do in terms of your plans during the sale, and what would happen immediately afterward?
Well, there's all sorts of moving parts in a deal, right? As you know, and I always laugh at business owners that are talking about selling their business and they want to sell for this much money. And I go, you understand, the amount is only one piece of the puzzle. How you get that money is the other piece of the puzzle. Is it cash on close? Well, that'd be great, but that's not normal. There's workout terms. There could be money contingent on performance. There's all sorts of things that could really affect what you end up taking home at the end of the day. And they kind of miss that point. They're so focused on the number, when it's just not the number. It's also all the other pieces to get the number. Sure, you might take less money if it's cash on close, or you can get more money, but you might have to work 3-5 years longer with performance objectives and et cetera, right? More, you don't get all your risk taken off the table right away. So in my case, it was there was some contingent money because we had a huge deal that was in legal and had not been completed. And so there was some money being held, being delayed because we didn't know how that deal was going to wind up at the end of the day. But for the most part, we got paid upfront. We got most of our money, some holdbacks for working capital and any liability kind of stuff that was all, wrapped up within a year kind of thing. And a 3-year employment agreement with some performance pay and in a period, because I had to build this data center. So, and still run the company. In our deal, what I really liked about our deal was that we left Epic as a subsidiary of the telco. So it still operated completely independent. It was not amalgamated into the bigger company where small companies go to die, right? And so we were able to continue operating the day after the close, like we were operating the day before the close. And so this allowed us to continue doing the work that we were doing and continuing the culture and the level of service that we were doing. And it was great. We were growing, continued to grow, right? We continued to grow, continued to produce good results. And so I had this 3-year agreement. What's really another big lesson to understand is to think about what can go wrong after you close. Lots of promises made, lots of intentions, not in writing, right? Oh, this is how we want you to operate, and this is how we're going to go forward. And here's the big opportunities on how we can generate more value out of all of this. And you go, great, this is great. Well, what happens with my situation is, a year in, the telco brought in a new CEO to what we didn't know at the time, but was to prepare the sale of the telco to a bigger telco. And this guy comes in and he is, drilling me pretty hard on information, but ultimately he's on a mission to clean house, to get rid of anything that his buyer is not going to want in the company. And so one day I got the news that I was being terminated halfway through my contract, or, a year and a half into my 3-year agreement. And I won't get to all those nasty details in that, but it was not nice, especially since we had just come off the best quarter we ever had in our history of the company. But nonetheless, it was not my baby anymore. I was not in charge. I had a boss and a parent company, and I knew that going in. I knew that something could happen, but you can never really prepare for what that might be. And then I've seen this numerous times. I'm sure you have too. So I had enough wherewithal, though, that when we constructed the sale process, that there was enough protection in there so that when that happened, I didn't lose anything. I didn't lose $1 of my payout. All I lost was a little bit of my ego, but I got a year and a half time back. I got all the money. It all worked out just fine. Again, anticipating something might go wrong like that is really important. That once you give the keys over, you don't know what's going to happen. They might drive it into the ditch, or they might do something else, or the parent company might get sold. And then you really don't know. All of a sudden, you're one level below the guy in charge and they sell the company. Now you're like 5 levels below the guy in charge. These things happen. And so it's really important that when you're selling your business, preparing for exit, that you construct that deal to protect you and to protect you from the things that are unforeseeable, that you don't know might happen.
Yeah. And having that self-awareness about what you're going to be comfortable with as a business leader, knowing that you're handing over the driver's seat to someone else. It's tough. And I've appreciated when business owners have been like, I can't do it. I need a clean break. I can't work for somebody else. I'm like, good that you understand yourself. Good that you know what you're capable or what you're ready for. So let's talk about what's next for you. You've had a successful exit, and what are you passionate about? What are you working on right now?
Yeah. So it's been 10 years since I exited, which is hard to believe. And I have to say, I often think about what could have been, right? If I just kept on running. Oh, yeah, the company could have been 3 times bigger and blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't take long for me to think back about all the things I've done in the last 10 years that I just could not have done if I was running the business still. And that ultimately says, I have no regrets. I have no regrets about selling. And that's a pretty good feeling to not feel like I'd made a mistake, to have no regrets about selling the business. And so in those 10 years, I've done lots of things, and I had a bucket list item to write a book. And I've done a bunch of things. After exiting and being a successful in business, you get these itches all the time about wanting to get back into business. And I told myself never to do that. Don't get back into real business, an operating company and where you have employees and customers and all that kind of, just too much work. I did that for a little while. I took a leap into one, and that was a big, big, big mistake. Worst year of my life was getting back into business, and not staying true to what I told myself. But one of the items on my bucket list was to write a book. And I've been putting it off for many years because it was just so daunting to write a book, as you know. It's so daunting. But I got to, after I wrapped up a bunch of things, I had some time, and I started thinking about the book again. What would I write a book about? I thought I was going to write a book about business lessons and stuff. But I partnered with a company to help me with this process. And as we were going through deciding what the book was about, it became really apparent that my exit story was the book. The steps I took to exit, the way I did it and the way I think about it was a little unique and really, really, really important. Something I'm actually quite passionate about talking about and helping other people with. And so I said, okay, let's write this book. And so I wrote the book, and it's called Getting to Exit. And which again, they're like, I'm thinking about this book and thinking about the name, saying, well, Getting to Exit is what it's all about. And going, I wonder, someone's got to have written a book called Getting to Exit. So I do some Google. Can't find a book called Getting to Exit. Wow. What? The domain name, gettingtoexit.com is available. This is a sign. This means I have to do this. And so that's the start of that. And so I documented the framework, structured the framework, and then put it in a book and told stories about my exit, stories about other people's selling and exiting, and the challenges and the mistakes that have been made along the way, to try to help other business owners think about this at the right time, understand that it takes time and intentionality to optimally exit your business. You do not want, like, a suboptimal exit is okay, comes with some regrets. An exit under duress, really not good, right? Exiting because you're ill and you have to sell the business, that is not optimal whatsoever. And so I just poured my soul into this for the last year, writing this book, and I couldn't be happier to do it. It's a legacy thing for me. Like, it's legacy in the business wasn't so important, like having my family take it over or anything like that. But finding something of legacy was important. I just didn't know what that was. And I think it's going to be this book.
That is excellent. And I know it's launching very soon. So we'll make sure that we have all the links in our show notes for our audience, because certainly hearing your story on this podcast, and then being able to read more of the details in that book, is going to help a lot of business owners as they think about when they'll exit their businesses. So tell me a little bit about Plan B Gurus, and then I have a couple more questions before we finish up.
Yeah, so I've actually had Plan B Gurus for, oh my gosh, it must be 35 years or something, right? It's the very first company name I had, and it's always continued to be there in some form or other. As a entrepreneur and a business guy, you just can't can't exist without having a company. So when I exited, just kept that company alive and used it as a means to doing different consulting gigs. And I also ran some peer groups for a while, and now the book and the potential spill off of services from the book. And so I'm now planning and then doing already, helping business owners start that exit journey, starting from the beginning of my framework of understanding the why, and then getting into your needs, and then figuring out all those other things. What's the gap? And the meat of it, of course, is what you need to do in the business, preparing the business. But it's also about preparing yourself. And I think this is something that business owners really forget to talk about and think about, is about how do you prepare yourself for the sale of your business and the exit thereafter. Not obvious. It seems that we spend a lot of time preparing the business to get to the number and going through due diligence and all of that. But the buyer doesn't really care about you necessarily. About the due diligence is on how you are going to exit the business. The due diligence is on how the business is going to exit you. And so one of the lessons I learned was even though I knew this was true, that in business, so much of my social life, my friends were linked because of the business. They're my employees, my customers, my vendors, my peer group members, so linked. I could not believe after exiting how fast those friendships started to evaporate and disappear. Not completely, but where you might be spending a time with people on a weekly basis, you'll have gone 6 months and not talked or seen of them, and that was a really, I'm glad I had prepared for that. I had built communities and friendships outside of the business, had nothing to do with the business, right? My wife played a big part in that, making sure we had a couple friends that were, again, not tied to the business. And I didn't realize how important it was at the time, but after exiting, now I realize how important that is. And it's not that I don't still have these people as people I talk to, they're still great acquaintances, but they're not going to be my good friends. I'm not spending that much time with them anymore, and so that was a really big part of preparing yourself. It's that you're ready for exit because you've prepared to have people there for you when you exit. Because the people that were there during the business years aren't necessarily there after.
Yeah, that transition, whether it's a career transition or transition, past exit, is difficult for a lot of people, and having the self-awareness to know you need to work on that and really need to spend time thinking about where you're going to be, what you need, what your plans are, what you want to do in the future is so key. I have one last question. I want to make sure people can reach out to you, of course, on LinkedIn. But what is the best advice a mentor has ever given you?
Boy, there's been lots. I'll tell you one story that really stuck with me, again from a peer group speaker who I considered a mentor at the time for a little while. And he was telling me about his story. Was his first business was quite successful, but quite leveraged. And there was an event, some type of event, I can't remember exactly, a real estate event or something like that, that basically killed the company. The company went bankrupt overnight, mainly because they were so leveraged. They had so much debt. When he came back to doing business again, he promised himself he would never be in debt again. His business would never have any debt. And he ran it, and he built another successful business and exited for more money than he needed to never have to work again. And became an American Express bum, he said, for a year, which is a great term. But he said, it's not that it's good or bad that you need to borrow money in your business. It's just that if you're a party with a lot of successful business people, there's a little group in a corner just having a little more fun, They're a little happier than everybody else. They're the business owners with no debt. And I took that to heart. And although I did borrow money at times, every time I borrowed money, I worked my ass off to get out of debt as fast as I could. Because I also understood that debt, whatever you sell your business for, debt comes off that number. No one's buying your debt. And so the more debt free you are, the better the result at the end of the day for you. And so I took that to heart, and I really worked hard over many years as I bought companies, we would take on some debt, but we would get out of that debt as fast as we could and get back to a strong balance sheet. And ultimately, when we exited, or when I sold the business, didn't have any debt, didn't have any personal debt, didn't have any business debt, which really translated into a much better result with the proceeds I received. And so that's would be one of my biggest pieces from a mentor is just that. Just think about how debt affects the whole thing long term, and understand it. And if you can avoid it, great. But it's okay. Just do it for the right reasons, and have a plan on how you're going to get out of it.
Excellent. Excellent. I've been talking with David Reid, founder, CEO, and author of Getting to Exit. Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure hearing your story and experience.
My pleasure, Heather. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for listening to the Growth Plus Exit podcast, sponsored by Newport, a unique national business advisory firm. If you enjoyed this show, be sure to share, like, and subscribe for future episodes.